Welcome. I'm Sean Shanley with Viridiant.
And I'm Andrew Grigsby with Viridiant.
Welcome to the workforce training for electric vehicle charging in the Southeast. Our goal is for you to learn about and get a better understanding of electric vehicle charging technology. We would love your feedback on today's training so that we can improve for future audiences. We've provided an anonymous survey for you to fill out. If you're comfortable, there are also some questions on there to help us know what kind of folks we're reaching so we can understand who we're training and who we might be missing. Our objective today is to leave you with the latest information and available resources on electric vehicle charging stations. As professionals, you'll be selling them, recommending them, and hopefully installing them. The presentation will focus on residential buildings, specifically in the Southeast. We want to make sure that you leave with helpful facts about electric vehicle charging. Please remember this course is about charging equipment and not the vehicles. So our goal is for you to be familiar with 3 technical or mechanical components of electric vehicle charging equipment, 3 market considerations associated with EVC equipment, 3 common myths about EV charging and the relevant facts, and 3 resources that professionals can access for more information when talking to users, businesses, and consumers. These resources come from a number of different places, including the U.S. Department of Energy. Our agenda today is to briefly introduce you to this project, cover electric vehicle charging terminology and technology, talk through some myths and associated facts, give you an overview of the market and incentive information, cover code and installation information, and finally wrap up with an activity. We are here today thanks to funding from the U.S. Department of Energy, which is intended to increase the market penetration of 4 technologies: heat pump water heaters, air source heat pumps, electric vehicle charging systems, and residential battery systems. These technologies were chosen because they have some of the greatest potential for energy savings, cost savings, and market growth. We are required to include this statement. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the views of the U.S. Department of Energy or United States government.
Thanks, Sean. Let's start by talking through some of the terminology used when we're talking about electric vehicle charging and go through a high-level overview of the technology. First, there's a bit of alphabet soup here.
As with any new topic, there's new jargon, and there are a lot of acronyms. Not only are there different types of cars and associated acronyms, but there are different types of charging station terms as well.
So let's break down those acronyms into 2 categories, vehicles and chargers. For vehicles, there are 3 main terms you'll hear. BEV stands for battery electric vehicle. We really don't see that term much, as it means exactly the same thing as EV, or electric vehicle, the term most folks are familiar with. PHEV stands for plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. These have both a battery-powered motor and an internal combustion engine. Both vehicle types can be plugged in. That's different from traditional hybrid electric vehicles, which cannot be recharged from an external source. But as noted, we wanted to focus on chargers. For chargers, there are 2 terms to know. EVC stands for electric vehicle charger, typically the device that can plug into a vehicle. EVSE refers to electric vehicle supply equipment, which is the balance of equipment, wiring, power supply, controls, and communications for a fully functioning charging station. You may also hear EV capable or EV ready. This refers to the status of a location. EV capable means that enough electrical capacity is installed at the panel to support future EV charging spots. Additionally, there's a dedicated branch circuit to make sure enough power is available for that future charging without overloading the system. EV ready is the next step beyond that, meaning it's EV capable, those requirements are met, but there's also a junction box or even a 240 outlet, like for a clothes dryer, already installed. Finally, EV installed means that fully capable charging equipment is installed and active. Think about your standard gas station. Each station has multiple pumps, and at each pump there are different fuel types. With electric charging stations, the EV supply equipment refers to a device that often looks somewhat like a single gas pump. Like a gas station, you can only fill up or charge 1 car at a pump or EVSE port. Here, the Alternative Fuels Data Center has done a great job pointing out that charging stations could look very much like our traditional gas pumps, but instead of gallons, you're purchasing watts or kilowatts. In fact, some gas stations now have EV charging stations. But you don't always have to pull into a gas station to charge. You may be pulling into your place of work, or a school or hotel, maybe even your own garage. In this example, how many stations do we have? There's one station. We can see the 2 posts, which offer 3 EV supply equipment options. And then there are multiple connectors, where each of those ports can have more than one type of plug, because different vehicles may take a different plug configuration. When we talk about EV charging, we often talk about what level it's occurring at, level 1, level 2, or level 3. And that refers to the amount of power that can be delivered at a given time. Level 1 charging is the lowest power option and is often the easiest to do at home. All that you need is a standard grounded 3-prong outlet with about 15 amps of power. And you can see on the left, there's a charging cable, like the kind that comes with most electric vehicles, plugged right into that sort of outlet. This adds 3 to 5 miles per hour, depending on the vehicle. That's how I charge my vehicle at home.
Same as me.
Yeah, it's a little slow, but I don't drive 200 miles a day, so it's no problem. Level 2, and that's a picture I took on a sidewalk in Richmond, Virginia, where someone just had an electrician put a 240 outlet where they could charge their vehicle more quickly at home. And it can deliver 30 to 50 amps of power. It will add, depending on the vehicle, 10 to 15 to 20 miles of range per hour. Level 3 is the high-powered charging that most people are most interested when they're thinking about charging when they're out on the highway. These are called DC fast chargers because they recharge the battery with direct current rather than the alternating current, which the other 2 options show. And they can be 480 volts, 50 amps of power, and that is going up quickly as manufacturers are looking to add ever more power more quickly. Here's a typical charging cable, such as would come with a new vehicle. And you can buy these off the shelf at automotive stores, big box stores. And you can see it's really just a kind of modified extension cord. And this one has the option where you can connect it either into a 240 outlet or to the 110 outlet. So it's very flexible. You can keep it in your vehicle and you're ready to charge almost anywhere you go. If you're plugging into 120 volt, it'll be slow charging, but slow charging is better than nothing. And we're now seeing where some of these can be even Wi-Fi ready, where they will come with an app and communicate with your phone so that you can set up exactly when you want to charge and if you want to stop charging at 80% of battery capacity, which is often recommended. Here are a few more photos of various home charging scenarios. They all use a dedicated charging device with its own hardwired cable rather than the cable that came with the vehicle. And these devices are hardwired directly into a 240 volt circuit. These also tend to come with an app and a variety of features allowing the user to control when and how much energy is delivered. Often this is to take advantage of time of use rates from the utility. They'll mention that now even the vehicles themselves can have that programming potential. I'd say when most folks think about home charging of EVs, this is something they have in mind. And here are some public level 2 charging stations. So 240 volt, not the super fast DC chargers, but not the level 1 slow ones, so in the middle. And these are often found in corporate parking lots, hotel parking lots, see them in shopping centers. And like those devices I just showed for homes, these have the cable hardwired to the charger, and that then plugs into the vehicle to deliver energy. You may note the branding. Historically, Teslas have used a proprietary plug design, so only Tesla vehicles could plug into those chargers. But that's changing. In 2024, plug adapters were made available to enable non-Tesla EVs to plug into the Tesla chargers. The charger shown here is a DC fast charger. You also can see the 3 different types of direct current plugs, the type you'd find at these high voltage stations. The CCS design is used by the great majority of electric vehicles. So there's a lot of effort going into making all chargers and vehicles able to use those plugs, at least via an adapter like the one shown. Electric current is a universal medium, and there's really no technical reason for the plug configuration to be exclusive. So there's a lot of confusion and debate about electric vehicles and therefore about EV charging. So let's talk through some of those myths and try and get to some straight facts. The first big point of confusion with electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging that I think of is the availability of charging infrastructure. This gets into what is called range anxiety with electric vehicles. So if I head out on a long trip, am I going to be able to charge when I need to?
Yep, absolutely. So interestingly, there are now more EV chargers in the US than there are gas stations.
Wow.
As of November 2024, there are over 200,000 public charging locations, and there's about 1,000 being added each and every week. So the notion that there's nowhere to charge probably comes from the fact that EV charging stations aren't quite as visible as gas stations may be, because they're located not always with gas stations, but in random parking lots. So there are various apps that'll show those different locations to make it easy for you as you're going on a road trip to find those EV charging stations. This graph shows growth in EV fast charging locations broken out by power output. Most chargers are fast chargers that can output between 250 and 349 kilowatts, and there are an increasing number of ones capable of really fast charging of over 350 kilowatts.
I'm seeing that there are lots of charging stations out there, but then the issue is like how long it takes. Am I going to be sitting around for hours waiting for the vehicles to get back on the road?
Not hours. Charging times will depend on which level charging port you're using. If you're using level 1, yes, that will take a while. But if you're out and about on a road trip, most likely you're going to use a DC fast charger, and you'll use one of the apps to locate those. In a pinch, you'll probably go for a level 2 charger, but that's more of a backup plan than what your primary plan would be. When you're using a DC fast charger, most vehicles can add 100 miles of range in as little as 20 minutes. That makes it pretty reasonable that even for long distance trips, you'll be able to recharge relatively quickly during a typical pit stop.
My family can probably live with that. A couple times you've noted how different vehicles might charge at different rates. They don't all charge at exactly the same way?
No, there is a pretty big variety. Some cars can charge around the 350 kilowatts using that rate. Some are as low as 50. So that will have a very noticeable impact on your overall time to get up to what most people want, which is that 80% charge. Because you'll see very fast charging up to 80%, and then to preserve the battery, the charging rate starts to drop off after 80%. So people will usually just call 80% good enough and continue their travels from there.
Actually, now that you mention it, I've noticed, because at my home I charge both a Nissan Leaf and a Chevy Bolt, and the Bolt seems to add miles more slowly. They have similar fuel efficiency, but for whatever reason, battery chemistry, battery technology, it just takes on the energy at a different rate.
Yep, and that is absolutely true. The Bolts are one of the slower charging vehicles on the market.
And I've read about some of the new models, Kia, and also super expensive Lumen, which are charging at 800 volts. So they'll just take on,
Yes, yep.
They'll be a full charge in 5 minutes.
Exactly. The time required to charge an EV's battery will vary greatly depending on the type and power output of the charger, and there can be a lot of variability even among the same charger types that you see. Acceptance rate of the battery, which we were just talking about, so that is the physical limitations of the battery within that vehicle and how much power they can accept at any given time. And then just overall the capacity of a battery. So if you have a 30 kilowatt battery, that's going to get full quicker than a 100 kilowatt battery. So those are the factors to keep in mind around the overall charging rate for a specific vehicle.
So when they say fully recharge the battery, a lot depends on how big the battery is.
Exactly, yep. Just like if you were trying to fill a bigger gas tank.
As we've said, we're trying to focus on chargers, but part of that still relates to the vehicles. And part of the question is about whether or not the type of vehicle I want is going to be electric. What's the current status of that?
There is generally an overall shift in the market to go to electric vehicles. As you've likely noticed, there's more and more models available on the market in a variety of different types. So if you want a sedan, those are available, hatchbacks, pickup trucks. So there's a wide range available right now. As of 2025, there are more than 100 passenger vehicle models available. And as I mentioned, that's sedans to trucks to SUVs to crossovers, sports cars, even EV muscle cars. And they're not expensive vehicles in all cases. You can certainly find an expensive EV just like you can find an expensive gas-powered car, but they come at all sorts of price points, new and used.
All right, let's shift a little bit to talk about the market opportunity for electric vehicle charging equipment and some of the available incentives. So the market for EV charging equipment is certainly driven by sales of electric vehicles. And here are the trends over the last decade for EV sales. What we're seeing is an ever-increasing market share in the US for electric and also plug-in hybrid vehicles. And what this points to is a complex and changing market with lots of players and stakeholders. There's consumers, and their demand rises and falls for various reasons. They may want different models, they're looking at prices, and they're looking at fuel prices. We also see regulations change as different government figures pass laws and pursue enforcement differently. And we've got manufacturers who make plans, respond to market demand, and keep innovating, all in sort of a constant cycle of iteration. And then installers are offering services, connecting with consumers, adjusting their prices, adjusting exactly what they offer. Again, all in a sort of ongoing feedback loop. Many folks articulate this market shift in transportation as well as industry and buildings with one word: electrification. As technology and energy markets change, the economic and technological arguments for all electric systems are steadily increasing. Fossil fuel prices have always been volatile. Folks are used to seeing gasoline and diesel prices rise and fall with the global price of oil. But the cost of electricity tends to stay a lot more stable. Mostly it goes up when fossil fuel prices, such as the methane gas used by so many power plants, go up. As renewables like solar and wind account for ever more of the electrical grid's energy, we see prices stabilize because there are no ongoing fuel needs for those power sources. The sun and wind are free. So those prices need not rise much. That's something to think about when buying a new vehicle.
Let's look at some of the incentives that are available for EV charging in Virginia. If you're in Dominion service territory, there's several residential programs available. There's a $125 rebate on a level 2 charging device. There's also a $40 annual incentive to participate in a demand response program once you do have a level 2 charging device. There's a newer program in which Dominion will install a level 2 charger at the customer's home. The customer then pays $40 a month over 5 years, so there's no upfront cost to the consumer. And then there's also off-peak rates for homes with smart meters, and that's going to allow EV owners to pay a lower rate during off-peak hours. So ideally they can schedule charging during those hours to help reduce the EV fuel costs. And some chargers, as we've mentioned, will let you program that information into them in order to optimize when the car charges. And then we'll talk more about this on the next slide, but Dominion also has a program for commercial and multifamily properties. AEP customers can make use of an off-peak EV charging plan that saves about 15% on off-peak charging costs. It does require that an additional meter base be installed and that the installation be done by an electrician, and that's going to be at the customer's cost. AEP also has rebates up to $100 for buying a level 2 charger. The Inflation Reduction Act also revives a credit for electric vehicle chargers that initially expired on December 31st, 2021. The Alternative Fuel Refueling Property Tax Credit is extended through December 31st, 2032. This is for homes and businesses in designated low-income areas. For homeowners, they can get a tax credit of 30% of the EV charger installation cost, up to $1,000. Additionally, there's the IRS tax credit, which allows up to 30% of the project cost, up to $600, for an electric panel upgrade that may be needed to add a circuit for an EV charger. At the end of October 2023, Dominion released a new program for multifamily and commercial property owners, which allows them to receive an incentive of 50% off of EV charger installation costs upfront. The remaining 50% of that installation cost is then paid off on the property's electric bill over a 10-year period. With this smaller monthly cost, it gives property owners the ability to charge users a rate per kilowatt hour that would allow them to offset that monthly cost.
Here's one more emerging feature of EV charging that I think is real important to discuss. And it became extra relevant to me just recently because I was thinking about buying a battery for my home. And I was researching those, and they're around 10 kilowatt hours. And then I remembered that, wait a minute, there's a battery 4 times that big sitting outside my house, my vehicle. And it's most of the time it's sitting there. And I thought, well, why would I buy this separate battery which is only a quarter the size and won't do as much as that very large battery in the vehicle. And this gets to what we call vehicle to grid, vehicle to home, or vehicle to load. And what this slide right here shows is how that EV charger could go both ways. While we've talked this whole time about power coming from the building or the charging station to the vehicle, well, why couldn't power go from the vehicle to that building? In particular, what I was thinking of, to my home. So it just requires the vehicle to be ready. Some are now, very few, but increasingly manufacturers are thinking about this. And then the charging infrastructure has to be set up to be bi-directional. So this slide is just showing how the vehicle could send power to the home, much like a solar array could send power to the home, or even the electrical grid sends power to the home. Then we're thinking about, well, I wanted the battery in part so that I would have electricity when the grid was down. And that requires the home to be what we call islanded, separated from the grid. So I don't feed back power to the grid when the rest of the grid is down. And so that's just a little more wiring and technology going in place to make that happen. And then finally, there's even a third option that isn't really about the home itself, but just the fact that the vehicle itself is a rolling power plant in some ways and could charge other things. And I know, like, for example, that's part of how they're marketing the Ford Lightning, is that it has a plug right on it to plug in your power tools. So all of this speaks to how EV charging is an evolving zone, because that large battery in the vehicle is such a flexible tool that can be put to so many uses.
We'll now cover a bit of the code-related information and some installation information. If somebody has an existing exterior 120-volt outlet, they can utilize that for level 1 charging. There's no extra permitting requirements because that outlet already exists. If you need to install a new outlet, a permit would be required. Likewise, when installing a new circuit for level 2 charging, whether that's a home or a business, a permit will be needed, and level 3, of course, requires a permit. As far as actual code language, the National Electric Code has Article 625, which covers terminology and important installation details, like a charger being on a dedicated branch circuit, and making sure that an EV can't unintentionally backfeed onto the grid. The 2024 International Residential Code doesn't require pre-wiring for EV charging, but it does have model language in there that a jurisdiction may adopt to require that in their specific jurisdiction. In 2020, Virginia passed a right-to-charge law to make it easier to install EV chargers where there is an HOA or a condo board. These associations can't prevent a property owner from installing a charger on their own property under this law, unless HOA documents specifically prohibit it. And there are some jurisdictions that are incentivizing installation. For instance, Fairfax County in Virginia waived permit fees for EV charging stations through April 2024. They also provided helpful resources, such as guides for HOAs, installing chargers, a checklist to help with avoiding potential conflicts during the installation process, and a document covering the applicable zoning requirements. One thing to keep in mind when choosing a location for an EV charger is if that location happens to be in a floodplain that's been identified by FEMA. If the project is in a floodplain, then you'll want to confirm with the manufacturer that that EV charging equipment can safely be inundated with floodwater up to the height of the base flood elevation. Alternatively, if it's not able to be, you would need to elevate the charging equipment to be over that base flood elevation. As electric vehicles become more ubiquitous in the United States, the country will need to develop more infrastructure to support them. People will need to charge their cars at home, work, and out in public. When you do make the commitment to install EV charging stations, where do you put them? Every foot of cable from the facility is expensive. There's also federal accessibility requirements, the ADA, that could conflict with cost and location. So these are considerations that you'll want to work through before you put a concrete plan in place to install EVCs. Virginia should be getting $100 million over the next 5 years as part of the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Federal Program. To conduct this work, the Virginia Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Plan was put together in the summer of 2022 and approved by the Federal Highway Administration in September of 2022. Now Virginia is tasked with beginning to implement the plan with the goal of installing sufficient infrastructure along the identified alternative fuel corridors. What this means is that charging stations need to be installed at least every 50 miles along those routes, have at least 4 DC fast chargers at each station, and each port must support at least 150 kilowatts simultaneously. As part of the plan, an assessment of existing infrastructure was conducted, including gaps where more infrastructure is needed to meet the requirements that were just mentioned. It was identified that 26 charging stations are needed.
Let's move on to a little activity to get into some of the details that might affect how the implementation, the deployment of EV charging equipment might happen in the real world. If you're talking about a parking lot, putting in that high-powered electrical equipment, that's probably different from most parking lots, which maybe they have street lights, but don't typically have 240 volt power running through them. So how does that affect how parking lot designers need to think?
Yep, so cost is always going to be important, and as we've mentioned, the wire that's needed for these is pretty expensive, so you're usually trying to minimize the length of that wire. In terms of priority, EV parking spots are usually designated for EV only. They are second in priority to handicap spots. The location of the handicap parking spots needs to be identified first, and then you would identify where the EV charging stations go next. And so after you've mapped out where those handicap spots are, you're going to be looking for the next closest spaces. Again, try to minimize that wire distance. So the next closest spaces would likely go to the EV charging spots.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation and have learned something about EV charging. As noted at the beginning, we would love your feedback on this training, and this QR code will take you to an anonymous survey where we can learn how to improve this and future training opportunities. So again, I'm Andrew Grigsby with Viridiant.
And I'm Sean Shanley.
And on behalf of the Advanced Ready Workforce Southeast Project, thank you very much.